want to transition to the Indian Wells tennis tournament. I'm a big tennis fan. People that know me and watch the show know how big of a tennis fan I am. Taylor Fritz, 24 years old, an American guy, just won Indian Wells. He beat Rafael Nadal in straight sets, won 6-3, 7-6. In fact, he snapped a 20-match win streak for Nadal. Nadal hadn't lost yet in 2022. He'd been on fire, playing the top of his game. He had just won the Australian Open. He was cruising through all these minor 1,000 tournaments, and this is the biggest minor tournament in tennis. The purse for the winner was over 1.2 million. So when I say minor, that's a loose term. This is a major tournament, and Taylor Fritz won it, and he became the first American, male or female, to win the Indian Wells tennis tournament since 2001 when Andre Agassi did it. And prior to this, he had only won one ATP tournament at all. In 2019, he won a 250 level tournament in Eastbourne. And this is substantial. This is substantial because when you think about, and let me preface what I'm about to say, I am not placing Taylor Fritz in this category just yet. Let me just preface this. But when you think about the greatest American tennis players, male, not female, male American tennis players of all time, obviously the first name that comes to mind is Pete Sampras, the 14 Grand Slams. You think about Andre Agassi and Jimmy Connors both having won 8 Grand Slams. You think about John McEnroe, who's won 7 Grand Slams. You think about Arthur Ashe, who's won 3. Think about Jim Courier, who's won 4 Grand Slams. Those are the greatest American male tennis players, in my opinion, to have ever played. You can go back all the way to the days of Don Budge, and there are guys who won 8 consecutive U.S. Opens in 1890 and 1910. Okay, I didn't see them play, and there were only 2 tournaments at the time, but those are really kind of the universal greatest American male tennis players of all time. And then you had this kind of newer tier of guys like Andy Roddick, who's the last American male to win a Grand Slam. He won the U.S. Open in 2003. And you kind of had James Blake and John Isner as this next tier of American male tennis players that were starting to ascend, especially Andy Roddick. He's kind of the bridge between those 2 classifications. And you look at American tennis now, and Taylor Fritz, I think, is the greatest American tennis player right now. He's the best American tennis player, male American tennis player right now. And I think that what this tournament shows is just the type of resurgence that tennis in the United States on the male side is showing. We're starting to see a comeback, a major comeback, and hopefully this can be a harbinger for what's to come with American male tennis players throughout this entire season. And you look at the number of guys that are ranked, and obviously Taylor Fritz is the first, and he's currently ranked now number 13, the highest ranking he's ever achieved. Riley Opelka is a fantastic player. You still have John Isner that's still working his way. Obviously, Jensen Brooksby played well. Francis Tiafoe has been playing well. Those kind of guys are the next generation of Americans, male tennis players, that are starting to burst onto the scene now, especially Fritz and Opelka. Isner has already been there for several years, but he's getting up there in age. Those guys are starting to turn a corner, and they're starting to challenge, and they're starting to consistently reach the 3rd, the 4th round of these Grand Slams at majors. And now some of these more minor tournaments, they're winning these types of events. And I've obviously been a tennis fan my whole life. I've been playing tennis for over 20 years. I'm actually a licensed tennis professional on the side of my broadcasting job. And for those people who don't know, I actually played against Taylor Fritz back in the 16 and unders. I played him in a tournament, and he won 6-0, 6-1. I did take a game off him, and if I'm sure he's not watching this, but if he was to challenge me, I do have physical proof of the draw printed out and the actual score. Fritz and Malkin 6-0, 6-1. My dad printed it out and highlighted it for me for my 24th birthday. So if we were to ever call a tennis match together, I do have proof of that. But needless to say, at the time that I played him, he was a number one rated player in California. And I remember he was livid when he conceded that one game. But what struck me then, playing him at that time, and mind you, this is now 9 years ago, and watching him play now, what struck me then and now is how dominant his backhand was and is, especially now. And that's the part of his game that's allowed him to ascend. That's the part of his game that's allowed him to propel and to propel forward and to kind of elevate his game, is the power that he hits with his backhand, how dominant he can be with that backhand. Every single player on the ATP Tour has an incredible forehand, and he does as well. And every player on the ATP Tour, if they're given a weak return shot, or they're provided an opportunity to hit an approach shot, a weak approach shot with their forehand, they can come in. All of them can pound it, can place it, can hit the crap out of it. That's not saying much. That's kind of a prerequisite. But not all those guys on the tour can crush their backhands. And they've got winner's ability with their backhands. That's a unique skill set. That's a unique trait. And that's what he possesses. Now, as far as his overall game, he's always had a major serve. He's always had a big serve. He's 6'5", so that's always been a huge advantage for him. And he's always been very solid, but I think his net skills have improved a lot. He's a lot quicker. He reacts a lot faster when he's up at the net. His athleticism has improved. His conditioning has gotten a lot better. And we're starting to see him continue to evolve and continue to grow and mature and look a lot more refined. This is someone who started off, he didn't even go to college. He went straight to the pros out of high school. In fact, he's from San Diego and Torrey Pines. His high school and my high school competed against one another when we were playing in the state tournament one year as well. And this is someone who's lived and breathed tennis his entire life. Again, after his high school days, he started playing those junior tournaments. He was winning those junior tournaments at the majors, then started qualifying as a legitimate pro on the tour, worked his way up, cracked into the top 100, cracked into the top 50, was starting to make some noise. And it makes sense. His mom, Kathy May Fritz, is a former American women's tennis player. She was a great professional, reached the quarterfinals in 3 different Grand Slams, won 7 singles titles in her own right. So he's had that background. He's had that foundation in place even before he ever picked up a racket. And the one thing you know about tennis, if you are playing it seriously, and the guys that are playing on the pro tour can tell you this, you need to kind of have financial backing to get started, to pay for lessons. Tennis lessons aren't cheap. And fortunately for him, he grew up in an environment where they could support that passion. They could help foster that situation and allow him to flourish a little bit more. And he has just burst through and is just continuing to get better and better and better. And for me, when I got a chance to see him play, I went to the US Open in August, and I saw him play Alex de Minaur in the first round of the US Open. It was a 5-set thriller at Louis Armstrong Stadium. That was a surreal experience for me, because here you have a guy who I kind of look at not as a contemporary in terms of we went to battle all the time, but he's 24, I'm 25. To see him playing in that stage was surreal. Absolutely is incredible. So I'm rooting for him as an avid tennis consumer and as a fan of American tennis players. I'm rooting for him to continue to take that next step and crack into that upper echelon of American male tennis players that can do something special. And he's having an incredible run. He's having an incredible run, and I think that this was a huge milestone for him, and I hope that he continues to succeed. So that was a very, very impressive win. Not to mention you're doing it against Rafael Nadal in that biggest stage. It probably doesn't get much better than that. So big congratulations to Taylor Fritz on winning his first Indian Wells tournament.